Hey guys, welcome to the Lulu Blue Studio. If you are new here, my name is Luisa, I'm your host, and in this channel we like to paint mainly botanical subjects in watercolor, sometimes also adding some different marks, mixing media in order to bring more fun to the game. I started a couple of weeks ago the series that is called the Spring Party, where we are going to paint mainly botanical subjects in watercolor, but also adding marks and different elements with colored pencils and crayons. And today we are going to use mainly our colored pencils to create leaves and secondary elements to our watercolor flowers. We are going to create 3 mini types of compositions, and I really hope you're going to like it and you're going to have fun. Let's start painting together. In this tutorial, we are going to paint 3 mini flower compositions, and the first thing we're going to do is to paint the flower part with our watercolor paints. In this case, I'm mixing on my color palette some Brilliant Opera Rose, where I added also a little bit of white gouache. A little bit of gouache just to create a type of pink that is a little bit more opaque and less transparent than I would obtain if I would use only watercolors. In this first mini flower composition, we are going to create 3 main flowers, and I'm starting from the central one, around which I will start to create other smaller flowers in the same pink color. The pink color is kept very light, and the idea that I want to bring along in this tutorial is how simple it is to create some flower compositions where we can mix watercolor paints with some colored pencils and bring a completely different vibe to your flower compositions. My focus in this first composition is to create these 3 main flowers, having the first one that I've created a little bit bigger in size compared to the other 2 flowers I'm going to create in the upper part of this piece. The color of the petals of this mini composition is quite light, because the idea is that in a second moment with the colored pencils I will want to add additional texture with these pencils, and therefore I want the very first layer to be quite light. As I said, I've added a little bit of white gouache to the pink that I had on my color palette to create this type of color that is quite light. But if you don't have any gouache available to mix to your pink, just remember to not use too much color, but dilute your color with a little bit of water to allow yourself in a second moment to add texture with the color pencils that are going to be visible on your composition. While the first composition starts to dry, I start to create the flowers for the second composition in this tutorial. In this case, we are painting some flowers where we are going to add with colored pencils some stems and leaves. And therefore, I'm using some orange color. This is a mixture of mainly transparent orange with a little bit of lemon yellow and with a touch of gouache that was already on my color palette. And I'm creating 3 types of flowers, super simple, with type of petals that are in round shape, where I'm also leaving some white spaces in between, and I'm adding some more concentrated color into the center of these flowers. In this case as well, I'm leaving the color of the petals quite light, because I will want to add different textures, in this case with colored pencils, in a second moment. This video is the 3rd video in the series The Spring Party, where I'm inviting you to paint watercolor compositions, mixing not only watercolor paints but also different media. I really hope that this type of compositions and tutorials are interesting for you, fun, and they also inspire you to paint different types of subject, mixing different types of media. Let me know in the comments below. And while the second composition also starts to dry before we add the stems and the leaves, I proceed creating the third mini flower composition in the lower part of this page, and in this case I'm going to create some simple roses. These roses are created mixing on the color palette a little bit of red, some Scarlet Red, and this is the red paint that I've added basically to the mixture that I had already on my color palette of pink and orange. So I have just added a little bit more red to create a warmer type of pink. I am using my round brush in size 6 and I'm starting from the center to create these sort of circular shapes that represent the center of this first rose. The more I am creating the outer petals, the more I am giving pressure to my brush and I'm creating petals that are thicker in shape. When I'm quite satisfied with the shape of the first rose, I add a second rose in the upper part of this mini composition. And the way I created this rose is very similar because I want this composition to be super simple, and therefore I start from the center and I create a similar shape, but it's a little bit smaller in size. Also in this case, I keep in mind to have the color of these petals quite light, because I will want to notice the marks and the texture that I'm going to add using pencils, color pencils. And so now the fun part starts, because I'm gonna start to add a different texture to my first flower composition using color pencils. My idea is that you can add these strokes with your color pencil and you can really bring to life the colors and even the shapes of the flowers you have created in watercolor. You can use any colored pencils that you have at your disposal. I have described which ones I have, the ones that I'm using in this tutorial in the description down below, but really you don't need to have anything fancy. My approach here is to use a similar color to the base, so the base of the first flower is pink, therefore I'm using a pink pencil to highlight mainly the center of these flowers and the shape of the petals. Basically, I am using the tip of my pencil to highlight the center of these flowers, and also I go over the shape of these petals, and sometimes I create some marks that are a little bit over the final part, the perimeter, let's say, of my petals, and therefore I make this whole composition a little bit bigger. You can use this technique and you can use exactly the same colors to go over your first layer of watercolor, or you can also use completely different colors to enhance some parts compared to others. For example, in my case as well, I'm using now an orange pencil to highlight some parts of the petals of this composition. You can use, for example, pink and orange pencils, or you can decide to have more contrasting strokes, using, for example, a red pencil over pink watercolor paints. With this exercise, you can really focus on understanding where you want to add more contrast to your petals and to the overall shape of your flowers, and therefore understand how you want to create this flower composition and which effect to give it by the end of your painting session. And while the first layer of the petals is ready, I take a light blue pencil and I start to create the leaves that are hanging from some stems that are departing from the center of these flowers. For all of these three flower compositions, the approach is to create the main part, which means the flowers, with watercolor paints, and then add in the secondary elements, which means, for example, the leaves and other elements with the colored pencils. I am creating leaves with a very simple basic shape, and I'm just remembering to have some leaves bigger than others and have them in different directions. Then with a different colored pencil, this is a green color pencil that is more towards the yellow color, I'm creating some other types of green elements, in this case a little bit smaller. My suggestion for you is to create these secondary elements in different sizes and also that are going in different directions to give a little bit of movement to your flower composition. It is up to you to decide how many elements to add and in which directions you want them to be. And also it's up to you to decide whether you want to fill the elements that you are creating with your pencils with the color of the pencil, or whether you want just to create the outer part of these elements. Creating elements with your pencils is a great exercise to develop that memory that will stay with you also when, for example, in other compositions you're going to create the same elements with watercolor paints, because you will have learned which shapes you want to give, and therefore it's going to be easier for you to understand which brush strokes to give to obtain that type of form. And at this point, I proceed in a similar way for my second mini composition. I have created the flowers in an orange type of color, and therefore, when the first layer is completely dry, I start to add with my color pencils some strokes, some marks, to highlight in particular the center part of these petals and the overall shape of these flowers. At this point, I just wanted to highlight how simpler it is to add these elements, these marks, with the pencils when the first layer of watercolor is completely dry. So let it dry, either you wait a little bit longer or you can accelerate the process of getting the first layer dry using a hairdryer. And so add these elements, add these strokes with your color pencils and behave in a similar way as you have done for your first composition. Either you can use similar colors as for the base, or you can use completely contrasting colors with your pencils to add this texture to your petals and to your flowers overall. And then I take my blue-green pencil and I start to add some stems and some leaves to this flower composition. If you are just starting to paint in watercolor and you would like to improve your skills, remember that you can always download for free the Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting, which is an ebook I wrote where I explain what are the techniques to watercolor flower painting and which are the best supplies that I recommend you using. So you can download the Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting if you click on the link in the description down below. Also, if you are enjoying painting and mixing media, don't forget to check out the other videos of this series, The Spring Party. I will link them in the description down below. Back to our composition, the second composition, I've decided to create some leaves in quite a big size in blue, light blue color, and now I'm adding with another pencil some smaller elements that are super simple in shape, just some round shapes, quite similar to the ones that I've created for the first flower composition. With this exercise, I would like to show you how simple it is to actually create something pretty and how you can easily improve your skills also in drawing elements if you are not used to do that. You can start from very simple and basic shapes, and just using different colors you can highlight some elements compared to others. Then with more practice you can improve your skills and you can understand which other types of elements you want to add or create, and this is a great starting point, especially if you are a beginner. In this case, I have decided to color some leaves that are part of this composition. While, for example, in the first flower composition, I kept them all basically empty, so I've created the basic shape of the leaves and the secondary elements, but I didn't fill with color. So in this second composition, I want to show you how different of an effect you can obtain, just for example, filling in some of the leaves with the colored of your pencil. In this phase, you can really create secondary elements with your color pencils in any way you prefer, and you can really explore and understand what you like to create and take the learnings for the next compositions, either full in watercolor or in mixed media. And when you are happy also with your second flower composition of this tutorial, we can proceed with the third one. We are first adding some strokes into the petals, and I am behaving in a similar way as I've done for the other two compositions, using similar colored pencils as the base of the petals of these flowers, of these roses. What I am doing is just creating these marks in a different direction, so not necessarily following the direction of the petal, but being a little bit perpendicular. So in this case, also you can obtain very different effects based on the way you are creating these marks. So for example, now I'm going perpendicular to the center of the flowers, while in some other cases I am following the direction of the petals. I'm also using different types of pinks that I have available to create a different type of contrasting marks into these roses. You can also improve, for example, the shape of your roses, adding some marks that are on the white page where we are creating these roses. So they are enhancing the shape of the roses, maybe making these roses a little bit bigger. It's up to you. I really encourage you to try and really don't think too much what the perfection is or where to add these elements to have perfect roses, but really to have fun and experiment with colors and with different textures. And now it's time to add the green elements. In this case, I'm creating some leaves with my green pencil, and I'm creating these leaves in a different shape compared to the ones that I've created for the first and the second flower composition. Doesn't really matter really what is the shape of these green leaves, but it's up to you to decide basically in which size you want these green leaves to be and which shape to give them. So in this case, I'm experimenting and I'm creating leaves a little bit in two different ways. So the first leaves I've created are quite long and with pointy elements, while other leaves I'm creating, also using another color, are more in round shape. So it is up to you, and I encourage you to have them in different sizes and also play with the empty elements you want to fill in with the different colors. So I encourage you to have areas that are maybe with leaves completely empty, where you just highlight the perimeter, while other leaves I encourage you to create them and to fill them in with some color in order to create some movement in your composition. I find this type of exercises super relaxing, and that's the reason why I decided to create this spring party playlist. I really hope that these types of tutorials are going to inspire you to try different media, to mix them, and really are going to bring along a new creativity into your watercolor journey. I am really bringing some of my personal experiences onto this channel, and I've noticed that mixing media really helped my creativity, so this is the reason why I've decided to share all of this with you. Check out the other videos in this spring party playlist and let me know what you think. Also, in this spring party playlist, I started to share more of a small type of flower compositions, and I would really like to know your feedback, whether you find it easier and simpler to start learning how to paint in watercolor from small size flower compositions, because it really looks like you liked painting in small size, and I would like to understand whether to create more content even in this style. In this tutorial, I just added a final touch, creating the center part of these flowers using an ink pen. I really like how this black from the center is popping from the pastel colors of the petals of these flowers. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next tutorial.